The Real History of the Ronin. Part 1. The rain began before midnight, a thin, cold drizzle carried by the wind sweeping in from Edo Bay. It tapped lightly on the old roof tiles of the abandoned barracks where Hirotada sat alone, sharpening his blade. The rhythmic sound of stones sliding against steel, shing shing, was steady, disciplined, yet beneath it lay the quiet tremor of uncertainty. War had made him fearless once, but life as a Ronin, stripped of purpose, stripped of master, had carved doubts into even the hardest men. A single candle flickered beside him, its glow revealing the faint scars across Hirotada's hands, memories of battles fought under banners that no longer flew. Now, the crackle of the wick was accompanied by the distant growl of thunder and the nervous breathing of young Jinsuk, who paced near the doorway, glancing at the shadows outside. "Do you think they'll come tonight?" Jinsuk whispered, his voice barely audible beneath the rumble of the storm. Hirotada didn't raise his eyes from a blade. "They always come," he murmured. "Not when a man is ready, but when he isn't." Jinsuk swallowed hard. He was only 17, but war had aged him beyond his years. He had joined the Asano clan as a servant boy, dreaming of someday earning the right to carry a sword. But fate had not been kind. The downfall of their clan came swiftly, brutally, without mercy. Lords revoked their support, allies betrayed their oaths, and the shogunate declared their land forfeited. Men like Hirotada became Ronin overnight, masterless, jobless, hunted. Outside the barracks, the night grew louder. The wind rattled broken shutters, making them clatter like bones carried by spirits. Hirotada paused sharpening and tilted his head. Beneath the storm's voice, footsteps. He rose quietly and extinguished the candle with a pinch of his fingers. Darkness swallowed the room. "Jinsuk," he whispered, "wake the others." Before the boy could move, the old gates of the compound exploded inward. Boom! Splinters flying like shrapnel. Through the broken doorway rushed shapes in the rain. Enemy scouts, armored in black lacquer, faces hidden, blades drawn. "To arms!" Hirotada bellowed. His voice cut through the storm like a strike of lightning. Jinsuk lunged toward the sleeping quarters as Hirotada stepped forward, blade ready. The clash was immediate. Steel crashed against steel, sparks flying in the dark. The air filled with shouts, screams, the heavy thud of boots on soaked earth. A scout swung at Hirotada's head. He ducked, countering with a swift thrust of the man's ribs. The enemy gasped, collapsing into the mud as more poured in. The Ronin were outnumbered, nothing new for them. Abandoned warriors seldom fought on equal terms. "Form a line," Hirotada shouted, his voice steady despite the chaos. Men scrambled, grabbing weapons that they could, rusted spears, chipped blades, makeshift shields. Hirotada's corps of experienced fighters closed ranks, pushing back against the invaders. Rain poured harder, turning the battlefield into a pool of red-streaked mud. Jinsuk reappeared, wielding a short sword. Fear trembled through his limbs, but he swung with desperate courage, slicing through an attacker's shoulder. The man fell with a cry. Jinsuk gasped, horrified by the closeness of death. But Hirotada's hand seized his collar and yanked him aside just in time to avoid another downward strike. "Focus!" Hirotada shouted over the storm. "Fear is a blade aimed at your own throat." The battle pressed on. Arrows whistled from outside the gate, clattering against walls. A Ronin screamed as one pierced his thigh. Another was cut down, falling face first into water. Through it all, Hirotada moved with the precision of a man who had survived too many wars to die in such a place. He cut down one after another, until the ground around him grew littered with bodies. But victory tonight was not triumph. It was merely survival. As dawn approached, the enemy scouts finally withdrew, dragging their wounded through the mud. Their shadows faded into the forest beyond the compound walls. Hours later, silence settled, broken only by the soft groans of the injured and the distant roar of waves crashing against the shore. Jinsuk sank to his knees, chest heaving. "Why do they keep coming?" he asked, rainwater dripping from his hair. "We lost everything. We pose no threat." Hirotada looked across the ruined courtyard, the fallen bodies of both friend and foe lying tangled in the mud. His expression hardened, jaw clenching as he cleaned blood from his blade with a torn piece of cloth. "We are Ronin," he said quietly. "To the shogunate, that is threat enough." The morning sun began to rise behind thick clouds, casting weak light across the coast. Smoke curled from the remains of the barracks where fire arrows had struck. The few surviving Ronin gathered around Hiratada, weary, bruised, their armor dented. "We can't stay here," said one of the older warriors, Ichiro. "The Matsui clan has been pushing south for weeks. If they discover us, they'll send more than scouts." "They already know we're here," Hiratada replied. "Last night wasn't coincidence. It was a message." Jinsuk's voice cracked. "What message?" Hiratada's eyes drifted toward the storm-tossed sea. "That the world has no place for masterless warriors." The group fell silent. They all knew the truth. Ronin were considered unstable, dangerous, a remnant of a violent era the shogunate wanted erased. Some Ronin turned to banditry. Others drifted from town to town, begging. Few held on to honor long enough to wield their blades in righteousness. Yet here they stood, men who once served noble houses, reduced to fugitives. A gull screeched overhead. The wind carried the smell of salt and wet earth. Hiratada sheathed his sword slowly. "We move east," he said. "We regroup, gather resources, and prepare. If they come again, and they will, we will not be caught in this ruin." The Ronin nodded, not because they hoped for victory, but because following Hiratada was the only thread of meaning they had left. Jinsuk stood and wiped his face. "I'll be ready next time," he said. Hiratada placed a hand on his shoulder. "War teaches those who listen," he said softly. "You listened tonight." The storm eased, the sky brightened, and the Ronin began to pack what little they had. Broken armor, salvaged food, a few arrows, their worn blades. As they left the ruined barracks, Hiratada glanced back one last time. Once, it had been a shelter, a place of hope after their clan's fall. Now it was only another battlefield in a life filled with them. But as he stepped onto the muddy road, something flickered in his chest. Not hope. He had lost that long ago. Purpose. A warrior stripped of everything except the will to stand. And that would be enough for now. Part 2. The morning wind pushed against the group as they moved eastward along the coastline, boots sinking into wet sand with every step. Waves rolled in and out with a steady rhythm, as if marking time for weary travelers. The sky remained gray, heavy with the remnants of the storm that had ravaged the night before. Hiratada walked ahead, his gaze fixed on the horizon, though every few moments his eyes flicked toward the tree line in case scouts returned. Jinsuk limped slightly, his legs stiff from hours of battling the rain, but he tried not to show weakness. The older Ronin noticed anyway. Ichiro, who had seen twice as many winters as the boy, slowed his pace to walk beside him. "You fought bravely last night," Ichiro murmured, adjusting the battered spear across his back. Jinsuk forced a smile. "I was terrified." Ichiro laughed softly. "Good. Fear keeps you from doing something stupid. The brave die first. The terrified learn." Hiratada heard the conversation but said nothing. He understood that fear better than any of them. Once, he had fought beneath a banner, confident and proud, certain his actions had purpose. But now, each step was a negotiation with fate. Every rustle in the bushes, every distant shout might herald enemies closing in on them again. They traveled in silence for hours until the coastline widened into a rocky plain. The remains of an old fishing village stood abandoned, huts collapsing, nets torn, boats overturned. Hiratada signaled the others to stop. "We rest here," he announced. The wind whistled through broken windows as the Ronin settled among the ruins. Some scavenged for firewood, though most of it was too damp to burn. Others searched the huts for supplies. Jinsuk found a jar of dried rice buried under a stack of rotten planks, and carried it proudly to the group. "This will last us at least a day," he said. Hiratada examined the jar and nodded. "Good. Every grain matters." As they began to boil the rice, smoke rose faintly from their small fire, too faint to be seen from far away, but still a risk. Hiratada positioned 2 men as lookouts on a nearby hill. While the rice cooked, Jinsuk sat near Hiratada. The older warrior kept his hand close to his sword even while resting. "Do you think we'll be hunted forever?" Jinsuk asked. Hiratada stared at the fire. A Ronin without a future has only two choices: accept death or fight to shape his own path. But what path do we have? The boy insisted. No lore will take in men marked by the shogunate. There are other ways in serving the Lord, Hiratada replied. A man's worth is not measured by the banner he follows, but by the blade he carries and the spirit behind it. Jinsuk considered his words, a glimmer of determination replacing the fear in his eyes. Before they could continue, Ichiro returned from scouting the shoreline. His face was tense and his voice low. Someone's been here recently, he said. Tracks. Not old. Maybe a day. Hiratada rose instantly. How many? At least a dozen men, Ichiro replied. Boot prints. Heavy. Not fishermen. Soldiers. The fire crackled as silence spread among the Ronin. Then we cannot stay long, Hiratada said. They ate the rice quickly, each man taking only enough to keep moving. Hunger was an old companion to them, and they knew better than to complain. As the sun began to lower, they continued inland, moving through dense forests where the branches formed a canopy overhead. The air smelled of wet leaves and cold earth. Birds scattered as the Ronin passed, their wings beating in frantic bursts. But suddenly, the forest grew too quiet. Hiratada raised his hand. The group halted. He closed his eyes, listening. No birds. No insects. Only the faint creak of a tree swaying in the wind. Then, a whistle. Instinct took over. Hiratada shouted, "Down!" Arrows sliced through the air, FFFSHH, burying themselves in the trees around them. One struck a Ronin in the shoulder, spinning him into the dirt with a cry. More arrows followed in a deadly storm. The Ronin scattered behind rocks and tree trunks. Jinsuk flattened himself behind a fallen log, heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the sound of battle. He peeked over the edge and saw figures emerging through the trees, armored men with the Matsui clan crest on their chest plates. Ambush! Ichiro roared as he deflected an arrow with a spear shaft. Hiratada drew a sword and shouted, "Form on me! Hold the center." The Ronin regrouped quickly despite the chaos. They move as one, shields improvised from stolen enemy gear raised against a volley. When the archers realized their surprise attack had failed, they charged in with blades drawn. The forest erupted into violent clashes of steel. Hiratada deflected a strike aimed at his neck, countering with a slash that opened his attacker's torso. Another enemy lunged from behind, but Jinsuk leapt forward, driving his short sword into the man's side. Hiratada saw it all. "Good," he shouted. "Stay close." The battle raged, branches splintering beneath clashing bodies. Mud flew beneath boots as fighters grappled, kicked, and stabbed in close quarters. The scent of blood mixed with the earthy forest smell, thick and metallic. One Ronin was knocked down and finished with a spear thrust. Another took a blade to the thigh but fought on, refusing to fall. The Matsui warriors were disciplined but surprised by the Ronin's unity and ferocity. Hiratada fought like a man possessed, each movement precise, economical, honed by years of training. His style was fluid yet devastating, flowing from defense to offense with seamless brutality. But the enemy numbers kept coming. Ichiro shouted, "We must retreat. There are too many." Hiratada parried a strike and delivered a killing blow. "Not yet!" Break their center. With a roar, the Ronin surged forward. Their charge smashed into the Matsui line, creating a gap. Hiratada pushed into the opening, his blade carving a path. The enemy faltered, losing momentum. Jinsuk followed Hiratada through the break, slashing at anyone who tried to block their escape route. His arms trembled, his lungs burned, but adrenaline pushed him forward. Finally, after nearly 20 minutes of savage fighting, the enemy began to pull back. The surviving Matsui soldiers retreated deeper into the forest, carrying their wounded. Silence returned slowly, punctuated only by the ragged breaths of the Ronin. Jinsuk collapsed to one knee. "Did we win?" Hiratada scanned the forest, his grip tightening on his sword. "No, we survived." He looked at the bodies of their fallen companions, the blood-soaked leaves, the broken branches. "But now they know exactly where we are. The forest wind whispered to the trees, carrying with it the grim truth. Their war had only begun. Part 3. The forest swallowed them again as they moved deeper into the wilderness, every step heavy with exhaustion and the weight of their losses. The sun filtered to the canopy in broken golden shards, illuminating drifting dust and a faint mist that clung to the underbrush. The sound of the ambush still echoed in their minds. Arrows tearing through leaves, steel crashing, the sharp cries of dying men. Even the forest seemed to remember the violence, its silence thick and wary, as if waiting for the next blow. Hiratata walked with measured steps, his breathing steady despite a gash across his upper arm. He had torn a strip of cloth from his sleeve to bind the wound, but the blood continued to seep through the fabric. Jinsuk kept close behind him, glancing frequently at the older warrior's injury. The group's numbers had dwindled. 3 men lay dead in the forest, and survivors carried the memory of their faces like stones in their hearts. As they reached a cluster of moss-covered boulders, Hiratata signaled for a short rest. The Ronin collapsed on the ground, some leaning against trees, others sitting cross-legged with heads bowed. Birds had begun to return cautiously, chirping softly as if sensing the humans were too tired to pose a threat. Ichiro lowered himself onto a rock and let out a long, weary exhale. "Another step like this," he muttered, "and we'll be ghosts by tomorrow." Jinsuk remained standing, trying to hide the tremor in his hands. "They knew where we'd be," he said. "The ambush, it wasn't chance." Hiratata nodded. "They're tracking us. Matsui scouts are trained for this terrain. We must assume they're still nearby." A younger Ronin named Keed, thin but sharp-eyed, leaned forward. "Then where do we go? If we keep moving randomly, we'll exhaust ourselves before they even reach us." "We don't move randomly," Hiratata replied. "We head north. There's an abandoned shrine near the river valley. High ground. Defensible." Ichiro frowned. "A shrine? You mean the Sarayu Shrine? That place is half rotten and cursed according to the villagers." Hiratata's lips curved slightly, not into a smile, but something close. "Then no soldier will think to look for us there." They gathered what little strength they had left and continued north. The forest grew denser, the paths narrower, forcing them to move single file. Their bodies ached with fatigue, but fear pushed them forward. Fear of pursuit, fear of death, fear of disappearing into the earth unnoticed, forgotten. Hours passed. Light faded. The air grew colder. Every so often, Hiratata raised his hand for silence, and the Ronin would pause, listening for the snap of a twig or the whisper of movement behind them. But the forest kept its secrets. By late afternoon, they reached a small clearing where the ground sloped downward toward the faint glimmer of a stream. Jinsuk rushed to the water's edge, cupped his hands, and drank greedily before splashing his face. The cold water revived him, if only slightly. As the others drank or filled their flasks, Hiratata scanned the tree-line. Something gnawed at him, an instinct sharpened by years of surviving battles and betrayals. The forest felt too calm, too still. Keed stepped beside him. "What troubles you?" "Everything," Hiratata said softly. "The silence, the absence of birds, the lack of pursuit." Keed chuckled. "Isn't that good?" "Sometimes," Hiratata replied. "Silence is the loudest warning." A rustle came from the opposite side of the stream. Jinsuk lifted his head, immediately, eyes wide. "Did you hear?" Hiratata drew his sword in a single fluid motion. "Positions," he ordered quietly. The Ronin spread out, forming a defensive semicircle near the water. Steel whispered from sheaths. Hearts pounded. Even the stream seemed to hush. Then, from behind a twisted cedar tree, a figure stepped into view, not armored, not wielding a blade, but holding a wooden staff. He was an elderly man, his white hair tied back, his clothes simple and worn. His face was wrinkled yet alert, and his eyes held both sharpness and melancholy. Jinsuk exhaled shakily. "A villager?" Hiratata did not lower his blade. "Show yourself fully." The old man stepped forward slowly and bowed. "I did not mean to startle you. Warriors." Ichiro emerged from the formation. Suspicious. "Who are you? Why are you in the woods alone?" "My name is Sojin. The man replied calmly, I am the keeper of the Sarayu Shrine. I saw smoke from your camp last night, and I sense fighting in the forest today. You sense it? Keed muttered, What are you, a spirit? Sojin gave a small smile, merely an old man who has lived long enough to tell when death moves through the trees. Hiratata lowered his blade only a fraction. Why approach us? Because I know who you are, Sojin said. Masterless warriors fleeing the Matsui clan. The shogunate has marked your group, has it not? Silence answered. Sojin continued, If you seek shelter, the shrine still stands. Barely, but enough to keep out the rain. And enough to hide you if you choose to fight. Ichiro whispered to Hiratata, This could be a trap. Hiratata replied quietly, Everything is a trap until proven otherwise. But the old man's expression held no deception, only fatigue and something deeper, sympathy. What do you want from us? Hiratata asked. Nothing, Sojin said. If anything, perhaps you can repay a small favor. The shrine has been plagued by bandits recently. I am too old to defend it. If you stay there, your presence alone will keep them away. Keed scoffed. We're Ronin, not temple guardians. Sojin met his gaze calmly. Ronin are still samurai. With or without a master, you carry duty in your blood, even when the world tries to take it from you. The words hit Hiratata harder than he expected. Jinsuk whispered, Hiratata, maybe we should trust him. We need a place to rest, to heal. Hiratata looked at his men. Their bruised faces, their mud-stained armor, the fatigue weighing on every movement. They couldn't keep running forever. Finally, Hiratata sheathed his sword. Lead us to the shrine, he said. Sojin nodded and turned toward the northern path. As the Ronin followed him into the dimming forest, Jinsuk felt something he hadn't felt in days. Not hope. Hope was fragile, but a spark of possibility. A momentary sense that survival wasn't just a delay of death. Hiratata walked silently behind Sojin, unaware that this choice, seemingly small, would shape the war to come and bind their fates in ways none of them could yet imagine. Part 4. The path to the shrine twisted through dense forest, each step a test of endurance. Fallen leaves and broken branches covered the ground, muffling their footsteps. The forest was thick enough that sunlight barely reached the floor, and the air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying wood. Even with Sojin leading them, the Ronin moved cautiously, aware that scouts or bandits could be lying in wait anywhere. Hiratata walked near the front, hand resting lightly on the hilt of his sword. The wound on his arm had stopped bleeding, but still ached with every movement. Jinsuk stayed close, shivering slightly, though it was not entirely from cold. Fear lingered in the boy's chest like a shadow he could not shake. He had survived ambushes, fought alongside men far stronger than himself. Yet every step forward reminded him of what was at stake, death, dishonor, or worse, capture. Sojin led them to a narrow ravine where a stream carved through the rocks. He gestured silently for them to follow, and then climbed carefully up a series of slick stones. Once across, he pointed toward the edge of the hill. The shrine is just ahead. You must move quietly. The path is weak in places, one false step, and you could fall into the stream. The Ronin obeyed. Each man placed his feet with precision, listening to the gurgle of water below and the occasional bird call. The forest seemed almost alive, holding its breath as they passed. When they reached the edge of the hill, the shrine came into view, shrouded in fog and partially collapsed. The wooden structure leaned slightly to one side, its roof covered in moss, and the walls were cracked and splintered. It was not much, but it was a fortress compared to the open forest. Jinsuk's eyes widened. It's barely standing. Barely is enough, Hiratata replied. It will keep us dry and hidden. That is what matters. The Ronin entered the shrine cautiously. Inside, the air was damp and musty, the scent of old incense mingling with decay. Broken statues of forgotten deities lined the walls, their faces worn and cracked. Dust rose with every step. Some of the men shivered. It felt almost like stepping into another world, a place removed from the war and the chaos outside. Sojin moved to the altar and tapped a piece of wood that leaned against it. It split easily, revealing a small cache of supplies: dried fish, rice, and a few flints for fire. "Not much," he said, "but enough to last until you decide your next move." Ichiro surveyed the interior, his eyes sharp. "It's defensible, but not for long. If Matsui scouts come, we'll need traps, barricades, anything to slow them." Hirotada nodded. "We make do with what we have. That has always been the way of a Ronin." As the men settled in, tending to wounds and preparing what meager food they had, a sense of grim camaraderie began to grow. Even in the quiet, there was tension. Each sound, branches snapping outside, the rustle of leaves, set them on edge. But Hirotada used this time to speak to the men, quietly, one by one, reinforcing their morale. "You survived last night," he told Jinsuk. "Not everyone can say that. That makes you stronger. Fear is not your enemy. Hesitation is." Jinsuk nodded, swallowing hard. The older man's words sank deep, like water filling a hollow vessel. For a moment, he forgot the ache in his legs, the soreness of his muscles, and the terror that had gripped him. Hours passed in a careful routine. Fires were kept small and low, and men took turns keeping watch. Hirotada walked the perimeter, observing the dense forest that pressed close to the shrine. He could almost feel the eyes of scouts, hiding behind trees, studying their movements. The world outside was relentless, and he knew that Matsui's reinforcements would come. He needed a plan, not just for survival, but for a fight that would define whether his group remained together or was scattered forever. As night approached, a low fog crept over the hillside, wrapping the shrine in a ghostly shroud. Sojin lit a small lantern near the altar, the flickering light casting long shadows on the walls. "You will be safe here tonight," he said softly. "But be ready. These woods are unforgiving, and those who seek you will not relent." The Ronin huddled near the fire, eating sparingly and listening to the distant cry of an owl. The sound carried through the fog, a lonely reminder of the world beyond the shrine. Jinsuk stared into the flame, thinking of the faces of their fallen companions, the way the rain had mixed with blood in the forest, and the terror of arrows slicing through the night. Each image was sharp, vivid, and impossible to forget. Hirotada sat across from him, quietly sharpening his sword. The sound, shing, shing, was steady grounding. He spoke without looking up. "Tomorrow we strike first. We cannot wait for them to find us. If we remain defensive, they will overwhelm us. We need initiative, even if it means taking risks." Ichiro frowned. "We are barely a dozen men. You want to face a full Matsui squad." "We do not face them blindly," Hirotada said. "We use terrain, surprise, knowledge, and above all, we fight as we always have, together." The night deepened. Mist rose from the ground and settled into every crevice, muffling sound, and giving the shrine an almost sacred quiet. The men rested as best they could, taking turns keeping watch while the others slept. Even Jinsuk, who had never been accustomed to the cold or the constant danger, managed a fitful sleep. Hirotada walked outside alone, feeling the damp chill through his cloak. He looked toward the distant lights of the valley below. Somewhere, soldiers from Matsui's clan moved through villages and forests, unaware of the trap forming at Sarayu's shrine. He clenched his fists, a mix of resolve and foreboding tightening his chest. The world had left him behind. The shogun had marked him as expendable. But here, in this dilapidated shrine, they were not yet defeated. Here, they could become more than hunted men. They could reclaim the sense of purpose that had been stolen from them when they lost their masters. Hirotada turned back toward the faint glow of lanterns in the shrine. His men were alive, wounded but resilient. They had survived ambushes, storms, and uncertainty. If they could survive tonight, perhaps tomorrow would give them the chance to strike back, to remind the world that Ronin, though masterless, were not without power. The wind rose again, carrying the scent of pine and wet stone, and Hirotada felt the first stirrings of a plan forming in his mind. It would be dangerous, it would be bloody, but it would be theirs. The Ronin would no longer wait for the enemy to come to them. They would choose the battlefield. And in that moment, even Jinsuk, watching the shadows and the mist, understood, however faintly, that the life of a masterless samurai was not only about survival, It was about seizing the moment when the world expected you to crumble. The fire flickered in the shrine. The mist pressed close to the walls, and outside, the forest held its breath, waiting for the storm to come. Part 5. The first light of dawn barely penetrated the thick mist that clung to the shrine, casting everything in a pale gray hue. Hiratada stood at the entrance, surveying the surrounding forest. Every tree, every boulder, every shadow seemed a potential hiding place for scouts or enemy patrols. His arm ached from the previous day's wound, but he ignored it, focusing instead on the rhythm of the world waking around them. Birds called softly. The wind stirred the leaves, and in the distance, the faint sound of running water reminded him that life continued, even amid war and death. Jinsuk emerged from the shrine's inner chamber, still rubbing sleep from his eyes. He was quieter than usual, as if the events of the past days had forced him into a deeper contemplation. "Hiratada," he said softly, "do you think they'll find us here?" Hiratada did not turn immediately. He let the boy's question linger, allowing the forest and the morning mist to answer before he spoke. "Yes, eventually they will. Matsui scouts will not rest until they know whether we live or die. That is the way of warriors." The boy flinched slightly at the bluntness, but nodded. Hiratada placed a hand on his shoulder. "But until that moment comes, we prepare. We do not wait to be hunted. We shape the battlefield on our terms." Inside the shrine, the other Ronin moved quietly, securing the weak walls and fortifying doors with splintered beams scavenged from the forest. The sound of hammering and cracking would echoed softly, a reminder that even masterless warriors could create order from decay. Keed and Ichiro worked together to set traps near the entrances, pits disguised with brush, tripwires attached to small bells, and sharpened stakes hidden among fallen branches. Each addition was crude but effective, a reflection of the improvisation that defined their lives. By mid-morning, Hiratada gathered the men around a small fire inside the shrine. He produced a captured map from the last raid, a crudely drawn sketch of the surrounding territory, showing paths, rivers, and enemy strongholds. "This is what we know," he said. "The Matsui scouts are organized, but they are not infallible. If we strike first, we can choose when and where to fight. The pass beyond the river will be our advantage. Narrow paths, cliffs, and high ground. Only a dozen of us versus many, yet the terrain will act as another sword in our hands." Keed frowned, glancing at the boy. "Do you really think we can defeat a full squad?" Hiratada's gaze hardened. "We may not defeat them outright, but we can disrupt, slow, and survive. That is the way of the Ronin. Our lives are not defined by victory or defeat, but by courage in the face of impossibility." Hours passed in meticulous preparation. The Ronin sharpened their blades, checked their armor, and inspected the traps for flaws. Even Jinsuk, who had never faced responsibility on this scale before, found himself assigning men to specific positions along the high ground near the river valley. He moved with a tentative confidence, guided by Hiratada's quiet mentorship. As dusk approached, the forest grew still, the fog thickening around the shrine. Hiratada climbed onto a rock near the edge of the clearing, surveying the path leading to pass. His eyes, accustomed to spotting movement, scanned the shadows. Slowly, he spotted faint tracks, signs that Matsui scouts had been through recently, likely scouting the shrine without risking direct confrontation. "Scouts are close," he said, descending back to the group. "They are testing our defenses, learning our habits. We must strike before they coordinate a larger force." The Ronin shared glances, understanding the weight of the moment. This would be the first offensive action they had taken since becoming Masterless, and the stakes were higher than ever. Each man checked his weapon one last time, the metal glinting in the dying light. Night fell. The shrine was cloaked in shadows, and the wind whispered to the forest as if warning the intruders. Hiratada instructed 2 men to maintain watch while the others rested. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by the sound of branches snapping and distant calls of wildlife. Every noise drew the eyes of the vigilant, hearts pounding, hands gripping blades. Before midnight, a low whistle echoed to the forest, a signal meant to confuse, scare, or provoke. Hiratada's eyes snapped open. He whispered command, and the Ronin quietly assembled, moving to their positions around the shrine. Through the fog, small movements became visible. Scouts approaching, moving cautiously, unaware of the traps waiting for them. Hiratata signaled the men, and Key triggered one of the tripwires. A bell clanged sharply, and a pit trap concealed beneath leaves swallowed the first scout with a muffled scream. The forest erupted in chaos as the remaining scouts realized the shrine was prepared for them. Arrows flew, swords clashed, and the Ronin fought with a precision born from desperation and training. Hiratata led the central line, moving like water through the fray, striking decisively. Jinsuk's short sword found gaps in enemy armor, and Ichiro's spear blocked attacks with steady, rhythmic force. Ki'd moved along the perimeter, cutting down anyone who ventured too close to the traps. Despite their small numbers, the Ronin's unity and preparation gave them an edge. The scouts faltered, underestimating the Masterless warriors. One by one, they fell or retreated, leaving a trail of blood and chaos. By the time the battle subsided, only the sound of wind, distant water, and heavy breathing remained. The forest was littered with the wounded and the dead. The Ronin stood amid the wreckage, exhaustion weighing heavily on them. Yet a quiet satisfaction lingered in the air. They had not been defeated. They had taken the initiative and survived against a superior force. Hiratata sheathed his sword and surveyed his men. "We made them pay for every step they took," he said. "But this is only the beginning. Matsui will return, and they will bring more than scouts next time." Jinsuk sank to his knees, exhausted but alive. I didn't think I could do it," he admitted, voice trembling. "But we did." Hiratata placed a firm hand on the boy's shoulder. "You are learning what it means to be a warrior without a master. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is action in spite of it. Remember this night." The Ronin moved through the shrine, tending to wounds and reinforcing barricades. The forest, though scarred from the battle, seemed to accept their presence, returning its calm. Even in the darkness, there was a sense of accomplishment, a fragile, temporary victory that proved their survival was not a matter of luck, but strategy, discipline, and will. Sojin emerged from the shadows, his old eyes scanning the aftermath. "You have done well," he said quietly. "But remember, the world beyond this forest is still hunting you. Rest while you can, for tomorrow will demand more than courage. It will demand cunning, endurance, and a readiness to sacrifice." Hiratata nodded. "We know, and we will be ready." The night deepened, the wind whispered through the trees, and for the first time since the destruction of their clan, the Ronin felt a fleeting sense of purpose. They had acted as one, fought as one, and survived as one. The road ahead was perilous, but the bonds forged in this battle would carry them forward toward the uncertain days yet to come. And in the mist-wrapped forest, the shrine stood quietly, a fragile fortress, a testament to the will of masterless warriors who refused to surrender to the fate that sought to erase them. Part 6. Night clung to the forest like a heavy shroud, the mist weaving between the trees and obscuring every path. Inside the shrine, the Ronin moved quietly, tending to their wounds and reinforcing the crude barricades that lined entrances. Each man worked in silence, the only sound a soft scrape of wood, the hiss of fire against damp rice, and the distant whisper of the wind through the branches. The day's battle had left them exhausted, but a simmering energy lingered, a mix of adrenaline, relief, and resolve that only comes from surviving against the odds. Jinsuk sat near the fire, cleaning his short sword with meticulous care. His fingers were stiff, his muscles sore, and his hands were slick with dried blood. He cast glances at the older warriors, each of them bearing their own wounds, yet none showing signs of fatigue beyond what was necessary. Hiratata leaned against a broken beam, inspecting the forest beyond the open doorway, eyes sharp even in the dim firelight. Ichiro checked the traps along the outer perimeter one more time, muttering calculations under his breath. Every precaution mattered. Survival was never guaranteed. Sojin emerged from the shadows, carrying a small bundle of supplies, dried herbs, bandages, and a few flints for fire. "You have defended the shrine well," he said, his voice calm and measured. "But these woods are full of danger, and Matsui will not forget your resistance." Hiratata acknowledged him with a nod. "We are aware. The battle tonight was only a warning. They will return with more organized forces. We must be ready to meet them on our terms, not theirs." Sojin studied the group, his eyes lingering on Jinsuk. "The boy has courage. he said quietly. But courage alone is not enough to survive these times. Strategy, patience, and unity are the true weapons of masterless men. Jin-suk swallowed, the weight of Sojin's words pressing down on him. He had felt fear in every step since the downfall of their clan, and though he had fought bravely, the forest at night reminded him that death could come silently, without warning. Yet the old man's presence offered an unexpected reassurance, a subtle reminder that even in the chaos of war, guidance and wisdom could be found in unexpected places. Hours passed slowly. The Ronin huddled in small groups, sharing what little food remained and exchanging whispered plans. Some tended to wounds, fashioning splints from broken branches and torn cloth. Others sharpened their weapons or studied the crude map Hirotada had sketched, marking paths and potential ambush points along the road to Sarayu Pass. The atmosphere was tense, yet purposeful. They were no longer merely fleeing. They were preparing, anticipating, and reclaiming control over a future that had once been stolen from them. Toward midnight, a subtle shift in the forest caught Hirotada's attention. The wind had changed, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke and the distant crunch of boots on undergrowth. He moved silently to the edge of the clearing, eyes narrowing as he scanned the darkness. "Scouts," he whispered, signaling to Ichiro. "They are testing us again. Observe. Learn. Do not engage unless necessary." Through the mist, small figures emerged, lightly armored men, moving with caution but carrying weapons, clearly assessing the shrine. Hirotada noted their formations and the rhythm of their movements. They were not yet aware of the traps or the strength of the Ronin's positions. Hirotada returned inside, addressing the group quietly. "They are here, but they do not know what awaits them. We are not yet ready for full engagement. Patience will be our advantage." Keed frowned. "Patience? We've been waiting all day, and they could attack at any moment. How long can we hide in this broken shrine?" Hirotada met his gaze steadily. "Long enough to turn the forest itself into our weapon, to strike when they least expect it. A rush or rash action now could end us all." Jin-suk listened closely, absorbing the strategy that had once seemed beyond him. He realized that surviving as a Ronin required more than skill with blade. It required calculation, discipline, and the restraint to act only when the moment was truly right. The scouts remained near the edge of the forest, unaware of the tripwires and pits set by the Ronin. One approached too closely to a hidden stake, triggering the trap. A muffled scream and a splash of blood in the mist sent the remaining scouts into retreat. Hirotada moved to reinforce their position, ensuring no one slipped past unnoticed. As the night deepened, the forest grew quiet again. The Ronin returned to their post within the shrine, hearts still racing from the near encounter. Sojin lit a small lantern, placing it near the altar to cast light across the interior. "You have survived the first test," he said softly, "but tests will continue. The world outside does not forgive the Masterless, nor does it forget those who defy its order." Hirotada nodded, his mind already calculating the next steps. "We prepare for tomorrow. We will strike first, and we will choose the battlefield. The pass beyond the river will give us the advantage we need. If we fight on their terms, we are doomed. If we fight on ours, we have a chance to survive, and perhaps to change the course of this war." The Ronin moved through the shrine, checking weapons and reinforcing barricades once more. Each man knew the importance of preparation, the thin line between survival and death. Even in this fragile sanctuary, danger lurked beyond every tree and shadow. Jin-suk sat quietly, staring at the fire, and whispered to Hirotada, "Do you think we'll all make it through tomorrow?" Hirotada looked at the boy, his expression firm yet somber. "We will do what we must. Survival is never guaranteed, but courage and preparation give us the only chance we have. Remember that, Jin-suk. That is the way of the masterless samurai." The wind rose again, rustling through the trees, carrying with it the scent of wet earth and distant smoke. The Ronin settled in for the remaining hours of the night, each man alert, each mind focused. They had survived ambushes, storms, and the weight of uncertainty. Tomorrow would demand more than strength. It would demand cunning endurance and the unshakable bond of men who had lost everything yet refused to surrender. As the mist thickened and shadows stretched across the shrine, Hiratata walked once more to the edge of the clearing, staring into the darkness. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the storm to come. He clenched his fists, feeling the familiar tension of a warrior poised for battle. Masterless, yes, but not defeated. Not yet. The forest whispered, the fire flickered, and the Ronin, battered but unbroken, prepared themselves for the trials that would come with the dawn. Part 7. Dawn broke slowly over the forest, pale light filtering through the mist and casting long, ghostly shadows across the broken shrine. Hiratata stood at the edge of the clearing, scanning the tree line. The mist curled around the trunks like smoke, and every branch seemed to hide a potential threat. His arm throbbed faintly from the previous battle, but the adrenaline that had carried him through the night kept him alert, every sense heightened. Jinsuk approached quietly, eyes wide with both exhaustion and anticipation. "They'll come soon, won't they?" he asked. "The Matsui scouts and more beyond them." Hiratata did not answer immediately. He had learned that young warriors needed time to understand that fear and patience could coexist. "Yes," he said finally, "but we will meet them not as prey, but as predators. Remember, we strike only when it benefits us. Timing is as lethal as a blade." The Ronin gathered their weapons, moving with silent precision. Keed checked the tripwires along the perimeter, ensuring they were taut and properly concealed. Ichiro inspected the sharpened stakes and the pit traps, testing each with small movements to confirm their readiness. Even Jinsuk, trembling slightly, checked the balance of his short sword and the straps on his armor. Every motion was careful, deliberate. Mistakes could mean death. Sojin appeared beside Hiratata, holding a small bundle of dried herbs. "The forest is restless," he said quietly. "They approach, and the animals know it. Listen, and you will hear more than just men. There is danger in every shadow." Hiratata nodded, feeling the truth in the old man's words. He stepped to the edge of the clearing and squinted through the mist. Faint movement stirred among the trees, shadowy figures moving cautiously, assessing the shrine from afar. The first wave of scouts, lightly armed, unaware of the traps awaiting them. "Positions," Hiratata whispered. The Ronin split into assigned roles, moving silently to their stations. Keed took the northern flank, hidden behind boulders and foliage. Ichiro held the center near the main entrance, while Hiratata and Jinsuk moved to the eastern side, where a narrow path funneled any attackers directly into their kill zone. The scouts advanced slowly, calling out to one another in hushed tones, their boots crunching faintly over fallen leaves. Hiratata felt his pulse tighten. Each man had rehearsed this moment, yet the anticipation was as sharp as the edge of a blade. The first scout stepped too close to a concealed pit. With a muffled scream, he disappeared into the trap, his comrades freezing in shock. The alarm had begun. Hiratata gave a subtle hand signal, and arrows flew from hidden positions, striking down 2 more scouts. Chaos erupted. The remaining scouts scrambled, trying to retreat or find cover, unaware of the spikes and tripwires that awaited them. The Ronin moved with lethal precision. Hiratata's blade struck cleanly, each motion calculated to incapacitate quickly. Jinsuk fought beside him, fear giving way to instinct as he parried and countered, his small frame surprisingly effective in the tight space of the narrow path. Ichiro's spear struck repeatedly, holding the center line against any who tried to push through. Keed's traps worked as intended, catching several scouts and sending the rest fleeing back into the forest. After 20 minutes of brutal engagement, the scouts lay defeated, either dead, wounded, or retreating in terror. The shrine, though battered, had held. The forest around it was littered with the signs of the confrontation: broken branches, scuffed earth, and the crimson stain of blood that marked the determination of both attacker and defender. Hiratata surveyed the scene. "This is only the beginning," he said, his voice steady but grim. "They will regroup. Matsui will not send only scouts next time. Reinforcements will come." Ichiro wiped his blade, nodding slowly. "We have proven we can fight together, though. That counts for something." Jinsuk knelt beside a fallen scout, studying the armor and the blood. "I never thought I could do this. Survive, fight," his voice faltered. "But we did." Hiratata placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Courage is not the absence of fear, Jinsuk. It is a decision to act despite it. Remember this feeling. Let it guide you in the days to come. The forest was quiet once more, but the tension remained. Hirotada knew this temporary victory had changed nothing. Matsui would return, stronger, and the Ronin could not remain in one place indefinitely. Yet for now, they had time to heal, to reinforce their position, and to prepare for the inevitable larger assault. Sojin appeared again, his lantern casting flickering shadows across the shrine. "You have fought well," he said softly. "But remember, victory is not measured by survival alone. Strategy, foresight, and unity will be required for what comes next. The forest is a weapon if you understand it, but it can also be a trap for those who do not." Hirotada nodded. "We will use the forest. We will use the shrine. We will survive until we can strike where it counts." As the night deepened, the Ronin moved through a careful routine, one maintaining watch while the others rested, another tending to weapons and traps. Even in rest, each man remained alert, aware that the first sign of a Matsui advance could return them to battle in an instant. Jinsuk sat quietly, staring into the firelight, thinking of the faces of their fallen comrades and the violence they had endured. He realized that the life of a masterless samurai was a constant negotiation between fear and action, survival and honor. Every step forward required not just strength, but wisdom and calculation. Hirotada watched him silently, seeing the boy's transformation begin. Masterless, yes, but learning what it meant to wield courage as a weapon, not only in battle, but in the discipline of thought, in the patience to wait for the right moment, and in the determination to act when others hesitated. The forest whispered. The mist pressed close to the walls of the shrine, and outside, the shadows of the trees seemed to bend toward the small group of Ronin who refused to surrender. Each man carried the weight of the past, the scars of their clan's fall, and the knowledge that survival would demand more than skill with a blade. Yet, for the first time since their world had been torn apart, there was a sense of purpose, a plan, a chance, not only to survive, but to fight with intent, to shape the battlefield, and to remind the world that masterless warriors, though cast aside by fate, were not without power. The fire flickered, the wind shifted, and Hirotada clenched his fists, feeling the familiar tension of a warrior poised for the trials ahead. Tomorrow would demand more than courage. It would demand cunning, endurance, and unity, and they were ready to meet it. Part 8. The forest was dense with mist and silence when dawn began to seep through the treetops, painting the clearing around Soreu's shrine in muted grays and greens. Hirotada stood at the edge of the hill, scanning the path that led toward the river valley. His arm ached faintly from old wounds, but he barely noticed. His attention was fixed on the terrain. Every rise, every fallen log, every tree that could conceal an ambush. The enemy would come, and when they did, he wanted the advantage of knowledge. Jinsuk joined him quietly, his breath forming small clouds in the cool morning air. "You think they'll come today?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Matsui soldiers?" Hirotada's eyes remained on the distant forest. "Yes, they have been testing us for days. Scouts, small groups, probing our defenses. Today, they will likely come in force. But we will not wait for them. We will strike first on our terms." Inside the shrine, the other Ronin moved with deliberate care. Ichiro inspected the traps, checking for any weakness that might have been missed. Keed adjusted the positions of the sharpened stakes, ensuring that any enemy who charged would find them lethal. The fire inside the shrine crackled softly, illuminating the men's determined faces. Even in exhaustion, there was a focused board of survival and the knowledge that the coming battle could decide their fate. Sojin appeared beside Hirotada, carrying a small satchel of dried herbs and bandages. His face was lined with age, but his eyes were sharp and unwavering. "The forest holds many secrets," he said softly. "Use it to your advantage. The enemy will not expect what you can create from these woods. Remember, patience and cunning can be stronger than steel." Hirotada nodded, appreciating the old man's counsel. "We will fight smart," he said, "but we will fight. We are not hiding forever." The mist began to lift slightly, revealing the narrow path through which Matsui forces would approach. Footsteps sounded faintly at first, then grew louder as small groups emerged from the trees. Hiratada signaled the men silently, moving them into position. Keed slipped to the northern flank, her movements almost a ghostly presence in the fog. Ichiro took the center, guarding the main entrance. Hiratada and Jinsuk positioned themselves near the eastern approach, where the path narrowed and would funnel the enemy directly into their kill zone. The first scouts appeared cautiously, unaware of the traps waiting for them. One step too close to a concealed pit, disappearing with a muffled scream. Panic spread to the rest of the group as they realized the shrine was defended. Hiratada gave a subtle hand signal, and arrows flew from hidden positions, striking down the nearest enemies. Chaos erupted as the remaining scouts scrambled, attempting to retreat or find cover. Hiratada moved with precision, each swing of his blade deliberate and efficient. Jinsuk fought beside him, parrying and countering, the adrenaline sharpening his senses. Ichiro's spear was a wall, unyielding and deadly, while Keed's traps and hidden positions caught the enemy off guard, slowing their advance and creating confusion. Within the first 20 minutes, the initial wave of attackers was neutralized, either dead, wounded, or retreating back into the forest. Hiratada took a deep breath, surveying the aftermath. Their small victory had been decisive but costly. The ground was littered with bodies, blood soaking into fallen leaves, a grim reminder of the stakes at hand. "We cannot rest," Hiratada said quietly, sheathing his sword. "This is only the beginning. Matsui will send reinforcements, larger groups. We must prepare for their return and decide when to strike next." The Ronin moved quickly, reinforcing barricades, checking traps, and tending to the wounded. Jinsuk helped Ichiro stabilize a torn shoulder wound, his hand steady despite lingering fear. "I didn't think I could do it," he admitted softly. "But we survived." Hiratada placed a firm hand on the boy's shoulder. "Courage is not the absence of fear," he said. "It is acting despite it. Remember this feeling. It will guide you through what comes next." Hours passed with careful watch and minimal rest. Every sound in the forest could be an enemy, every movement a potential threat. Hiratada walked the perimeter, listening, observing, and planning. He knew that survival required more than strength. It demanded foresight, patience, and the ability to anticipate the enemy's movements. As night approached, a low fog returned, curling through the trees and surrounding the shrine. Sojin lit a lantern near the altar, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. "You have proven yourselves capable," he said softly, "but the true test will come when the enemy brings their full force. Remember, the forest is your ally if you understand it, but it can also be your prison if you underestimate it." Hiratada nodded. "We understand, and we will use it to our advantage. We will survive, not by hiding, but by choosing the moment to fight." The men settled into positions for the night, maintaining watch in shifts. Even in rest, each remained alert, every sound triggering a tightened grip on a weapon. Jinsuk sat near the fire, staring into flickering flames, reflecting on the faces of the fallen and the battles they had endured. He realized that the life of a masterless samurai was more than surviving attacks. It was about mastering fear, planning, and action. Hiratada stood at the edge of the clearing one last time, eyes scanning the mist-shrouded forest. The wind carried the scent of wet earth and distant smoke, a reminder that the enemy was still moving, still planning. He clenched his fists, feeling the familiar tension of a warrior anticipating the next battle. Masterless, yes, but not defeated. The shrine, fragile yet fortified, stood as their sanctuary and battleground. The forest whispered around them, holding its breath, waiting for the storm to arrive. Tomorrow would demand more than courage. It would demand strategy, endurance, and unity. And the Ronin, battered yet unbroken, would face it together, ready to carve their path through the chaos of war. Part 9. The first rays of sunlight pierced the forest canopy, cutting through the lingering mist and casting jagged shadows across the shrine. The forest was still, but the stillness carried a weight heavier than any storm. Hiratada stood at the edge of the clearing, eyes scanning the paths that led to Sarayu Pass. He could sense the movement of troops beyond the tree line, the faint sounds of boots on undergrowth, and whispers of men preparing for a coordinated assault. Jinsuk approached silently, his face pale but determined. "They're coming," he said. "I can hear them. Matsui's soldiers." Hirotada nodded without turning. Yes, today we meet them not as prey, but as warriors with a plan. Remember what I taught you: patience, timing, and unity. Our strength lies not in numbers, but in strategy and resolve. Inside the shrine, the other Ronin moved with silent efficiency. Ichiro checked the traps one last time, ensuring that pitfall covers were firm and stakes angled for maximum effect. Keed adjusted positions on the northern flank, moving through shadows with a ghostly grace. The fire inside the shrine burned low, the smoke curling toward the rafters and mixing with the scent of damp wood and moss. Each man prepared in silence, every motion deliberate, knowing that the smallest mistake could cost a life. Sojin appeared quietly, carrying a satchel with dried herbs and bandages. "The forest itself watches you," he said softly. "Every shadow, every sound can be turned to your advantage. Remember, the land favors those who know it better than their enemy." Hirotada gave a small nod. "We will use every advantage. The enemy will underestimate the Masterless, but we are no longer men without purpose." The approach of the Matsui forces became clearer as dawn progressed. Small groups of scouts moved cautiously, testing the forest's edge. Hirotada signaled the Ronin into position, their movements silent and precise. Keed crouched behind a boulder, bow ready. Ichiro held the center line near the main entrance, spear angled and poised. Hirotada and Jinsuk took their positions along the narrow eastern path, the terrain naturally funneling the enemy into their trap. The first scout stepped forward, unaware of the tripwires and pitfalls concealed beneath leaves. One fell into a pit with a muffled scream, followed by a rush of panic among the others. Hirotada's signal sent arrows flying from hidden positions, felling 2 more. Chaos erupted as the remaining scouts scrambled, trying to retreat or find cover. Hirotada moved like water through the fray, his blade precise and deliberate. Jinsuk parried and struck beside him, fear giving way to focus and instinct. Ichiro's spear held the center with unyielding force, and Keed's traps and sharpshooting slowed the enemy advance, scattering them into confusion. Despite their small number, the Ronin's unity and preparation gave them the upper hand. After the initial engagement, the forest grew quiet once more. Bodies littered the ground, blood soaking into leaves and soil. Hirotada surveyed the scene, his eyes calculating the next move. "This was only a test," he said quietly. "They will regroup and return in greater numbers. We must be ready to strike first when they do." The Ronin worked quickly, tending to wounds, reinforcing barricades, and checking the traps for damage. Jinsuk helped Ichiro stabilize a deep gash on his leg, his hands steady despite exhaustion. "I didn't think I could do it," he admitted softly. "But we survived." Hirotada placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Courage is not the absence of fear," he said. "It is action in spite of it. Remember this feeling, Jinsuk. It will guide you through what comes next." The morning passed in tense preparation. Every sound from the forest, rustling leaves, snapping twigs, distant bird calls, was treated as potential intelligence. Hirotada reviewed the crude map he had sketched, marking paths, choke points, and vantage positions. Every tree, boulder, and fallen branch was considered as part of the battlefield. Survival required foresight as much as strength. By midday, distant drum beats and horns signaled the approach of a larger Matsui force. Hirotada's men took their positions with quiet efficiency. The shrine's weak walls had been reinforced with planks and rocks, traps hidden and arrows ready. Sojin's old lanterns flickered inside, casting long shadows that seemed to dance across the walls. When the enemy emerged from the forest, the Ronin struck with precision. Keed loosed arrows from concealed positions, taking down the first wave before they could reach the clearing. Ichiro's spear struck relentlessly, creating a wall of steel that funneled the enemy into the eastern path. Hirotada and Jinsuk moved as one, cutting through the center, their movements coordinated, each strike calculated to incapacitate efficiently. Despite being outnumbered, the Ronin's preparation and unity allowed them to control the battlefield. The enemy faltered, confusion spreading through their ranks. Pitfalls and hidden stakes claimed several more, while arrows rained from the shadows, each one finding its mark. After nearly an hour of intense combat, the remaining Matsui soldiers retreated, leaving the clearing littered with bodies and the air heavy with the scent of blood and smoke. Hiratata surveyed his men, exhausted but alive. "We have bought time," he said, "but the enemy will return. We must use this moment to heal, to reinforce, and to prepare for the next strike." The Ronin moved to the shrine, tending to the wounded and reinforcing defenses. Jinsuk cleaned his blade, his hands shaking slightly, but his mind clearer than it had been in days. He understood now that survival was not just about skill or courage. It was about preparation, strategy, and acting decisively when the moment demanded it. Sojin watched quietly, his expression unreadable. "You have survived the first wave," he said softly, "but the war is far from over. The forest will be your ally if you respect it, but it can also become a prison if you underestimate it. Remember this lesson, and you may live to see the next dawn." Hiratata nodded. "We understand. Tomorrow, we will take the initiative again. We fight not only to survive, but to shape the battlefield to our advantage. We are masterless, yes, but not powerless." The wind stirred through the trees, carrying the faint scent of distant smoke and the sound of moving troops. The shrine stood fragile but unbroken, a sanctuary and a fortress of those who refused to surrender. The Ronin settled into their positions for the night, alert even in rest, every sense honed for the inevitable confrontation. Jinsuk stared into the flickering fire, reflecting on the cost of their survival and the courage required to continue. He understood now that the life of a masterless samurai demanded more than strength. It demanded calculation, patience, and unity. Hiratata moved to the edge of the clearing one last time, eyes scanning the mist-laden forest. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the promise of the next battle. The Ronin, though battered and few in number, were ready to face it together, prepared to carve their path through the chaos that awaited them beyond the mist. Part 10. The sun had barely risen, painting the forest in muted shades of green and gray. Mist clung stubbornly to ground, curling around tree trunks and fallen branches like fingers seeking to ensnare the unwary. Hiratata moved quietly along the edge of the clearing, feeling the tension in his body from hours of vigilance. His wound throbbed faintly, a constant reminder that the body could betray him even when the mind was sharp. Jinsuk joined him, silent and alert. His eyes, once wide with fear, now held a focused intensity. "They're coming," he whispered. "I can hear them moving through the underbrush." Matsui's reinforcements. Hiratata nodded without turning. "Yes, today we will not wait. We strike first, or we risk being overwhelmed. Remember everything I taught you: timing, patience, and unity. The forest is our ally, the terrain our weapon. Use it wisely." Inside the shrine, the other Ronin prepared silently. Ichiro inspected the traps again, testing their mechanisms to ensure there were no weaknesses. Keat adjusted her position along the northern edge, blending with shadows and foliage. The fire burned low, flickering against the walls, casting long, dancing shadows across the floor. Each man moved with precise efficiency, every action deliberate. Survival demanded nothing less. Sojin appeared, carrying a bundle of bandages and herbs. His face, lined with age, was unreadable, but his eyes were sharp, reflecting the knowledge of countless battles. "The enemy approaches," he said softly. "Do not underestimate them. They are organized, and desperation can make even the weakest dangerous. Remember, the forest can be both ally and executioner." Hiratata gave a subtle nod. "We will use every advantage. The enemy will not expect what we can create from this terrain. Today, we define the battlefield, not them." Through the thinning mist, faint figures began to emerge. Matsui soldiers, moving cautiously but steadily. The first group, lightly armored scouts, tested the perimeter, unaware of the traps and defensive positions that awaited them. One stepped too close to a concealed pit, disappearing with muffled scream. Panic spread to the remaining scouts, and Hiratata's signal sent a volley of arrows raining from concealed positions. Chaos erupted. The Ronin moved as one. Hiratata's blade struck with precision, cutting through gaps in the enemy lines. Jinsuk followed his lead, parrying and striking with growing confidence. Ichiro held the center, his spear creating a barrier that funneled the enemy into predetermined kill zones. Keyed sharpshooting and traps ensured that every advance by the Matsui forces was met with resistance. The force itself became a weapon. Each tree and rock used to control movement and create lethal choke points. After nearly half an hour, the initial wave was neutralized. Bodies littered the forest floor, some caught in traps, others fell by arrows or blades. Hirotada surveyed the scene, calculating the next move. This was only the first wave, he said quietly. They will regroup and return stronger. We must use this moment to heal, reinforce, and prepare for the next engagement. The Ronin worked swiftly. Wounds were tended, traps repaired, and barricades strengthened. Jinsook assisted Ichiro in stabilizing a deep gash along his leg, his hand steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through him. I didn't think I could survive, Jinsook admitted softly. But we did. Hirotada placed a firm hand on his shoulder. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the act of moving forward despite it. Remember this feeling, Jinsook. It will guide you in the battles to come. The day wore on in tense preparation. Every sound in the forest, the rustle of leaves, the snapping of twigs, the distant call of birds, was scrutinized for intelligence. Hirotada reviewed the crude map of the surrounding territory, marking choke points, vantage positions, and potential ambush sites. Each boulder, fallen tree, and slope was considered in the calculations of survival. By afternoon, the sound of distant drums and horns signaled the arrival of a larger Matsui force. Hirotada's men moved with quiet determination to their positions. Keed's arrows flew from concealment, picking off the leading soldiers before they could reach the clearing. Ichiro held the center, his spear creating an impenetrable line, while Hirotada and Jinsook struck decisively from the eastern approach. The battle was relentless. The enemy advanced in waves, but the Ronin's unity and strategy allowed them to control the fight. Pitfalls claimed soldiers, traps slowed their advance, and arrows struck with deadly accuracy. Each strike was deliberate, each movement calculated to minimize risk while maximizing effect. The forest funneled the attackers into positions where the defenders had the advantage. Hours passed in a blur of motion, steel and blood. The forest grew quiet again, broken only by the heavy breathing of the Ronin and the distant retreat of Matsui forces. Hirotada surveyed the aftermath, exhaustion gnawing at his body, but satisfaction warming his chest. We have won this day, he said quietly, but the war is not over. Matsui will return, and we must be ready. The Ronin moved to the shrine, reinforcing defenses, tending to wounds, and preparing for the next encounter. Jinsook cleaned his sword, reflecting on the cost of survival and the courage it demanded. He understood now that the life of a masterless samurai required not only skill, but patience, foresight, and the willingness to act decisively in the face of fear. Sojin watched silently, his expression unreadable. You have survived this engagement, he said softly. But remember, the true battle is as much of the mind as it is of the body. The forest can be your ally if you respect it, but it can also become your prison if you underestimate it. Hirotada nodded. We understand. Tomorrow, we will continue to take the initiative. We fight not only to survive, but to shape the battlefield to our advantage. We are masterless, yes, but not powerless. The wind stirred through the trees, carrying the scent of smoke and the faint sound of distant movement. The shrine stood fragile but unbroken, a fortress for those who refused to surrender. The Ronin settled into their night positions, alert even in rest. Every sense attuned to the forest's whispers. Jinsook stared into the dying fire, contemplating the cost of survival and the courage required to continue. The life of a masterless samurai demanded more than strength. It demanded unity, calculation, and endurance. Hirotada walked to the edge of the clearing one last time, eyes scanning the misty forest. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the promise of the next battle. Though battered and outnumbered, the Ronin were ready. Together, they would carve their path through chaos, proving that even without a master, they were still warriors. Part 11. The morning arrived gray and heavy, the forest wrapped in mist that clung to every branch and fallen log. Hirotada moved along the ridge overlooking the river valley, sensing the tension in the air before hearing it. The faint sound of marching boots, a rhythm of war, came from deep within the forest. Matsui's reinforcements had arrived, larger than any force they had faced before. Their banners, dark and ominous, were visible through breaks in the fog, and the weight of their numbers pressed upon the small clearing like a storm ready to break. Jinsuk joined Hirotada, gripping his short sword tightly. His knuckles were white, but his eyes had a hardened focus. "They're here in force," he said, voice low but steady. "I can't count how many." Hirotada did not flinch. "Numbers alone do not decide battles," he replied. "We have the forest, the terrain, and the element of surprise. We will choose where they fight, and we will shape their path. Remember, our strength is strategy, not simply the edge of the blade." Inside the shrine, the Ronin prepared quickly, moving with the precision born of countless drills and hard-won experience. Keat adjusted her bow, checking the tension of the string. Ichiro inspected the stakes and traps along the narrow eastern path, testing them to ensure they would withstand the weight of charging soldiers. Sojin moved quietly among them, offering advice and reinforcement where needed, the weight of his age tempered by the sharpness of his experience. Hirotada surveyed the terrain from a ridge, his eyes noting every rise, every dip, and every natural bottleneck where the enemy could be funneled. "The river valley," he murmured. "They will attempt to advance along the road. We will intercept them there. Narrow paths and high ground favor us. We do not need to meet them in open combat. We need only make the land work for us." Jinsuk watched silently, absorbing the lesson. Each day, each battle, each moment of fear and action was shaping him into something more than a boy who had fled the downfall of his clan. He was learning that a masterless warrior's strength lay not only in skill, but in foresight and the ability to act decisively under pressure. The first wave of enemy soldiers entered the clearing, marching in formation, confident in their numbers. Hirotada signaled the Ronin into position. Keat's arrow struck first, felling the leading soldiers before they could reach the choke point. Ichiro's spear wall created a barrier that funneled them into the narrow eastern path. Hirotada and Jinsuk struck with precision, cutting down anyone attempting to break through. Pitfalls and concealed stakes claimed several others, forcing the remainder into confusion and retreat. Despite the enemy's superior numbers, the Ronin's preparation and unity gave them the upper hand. Each move was calculated. Each strike had purpose. The forest became a weapon, guiding the enemy into the traps laid over days of careful planning. By midday, the enemy had been repelled, but the cost was evident. The ground was littered with fallen soldiers, traps shattered from repeated strikes, and the air thick with the smell of blood and smoke. Hirotada surveyed his men, noting both their fatigue and the determination that burned in their eyes. "This was a victory," he said quietly, "but only a temporary one. They will regroup. Matsui will not accept failure. We must be ready for the next engagement." The Ronin moved quickly, reinforcing barricades, tending to wounds and redistributing supplies. Jinsuk helped Ichiro stabilize a deep gash along his arm, hands steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through him. "I never thought I could survive this," Jinsuk admitted softly. "But we did." Hirotada placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Courage is not the absence of fear. It is action despite it. Remember this feeling. It will guide you through the battles ahead." Hours passed in preparation and quiet observation. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, every distant call of bird could signal enemy movement. Hirotada reviewed the map, marking potential ambush points, choke points, and high ground. Every natural feature was a weapon to be wielded strategically. By late afternoon, the sound of drums and horns echoed through the valley, signaling the approach of an even larger force. Hirotada's men took their positions, every sense heightened. Keat's arrows struck from concealment, picking off enemy officers and disrupting formation. Ichiro held the center, a wall of steel and muscle that funneled the attackers. Hirotada and Jinsuk moved fluidly along the eastern approach, cutting down anyone attempting to break through. The battle raged for hours, a brutal test of endurance and skill. Despite being outnumbered, the Ronin controlled the fight. Pitfalls and stakes claimed many. Arrows struck with deadly accuracy, and every movement was calculated to maximize effect while minimizing risk. The enemy faltered repeatedly, disoriented by the terrain and relentless defense. As dusk fell, the remaining Matsui soldiers retreated, leaving the forest littered with bodies and debris. Hiratada stood among his men, exhaustion heavy in his limbs, but satisfaction warming his chest. "We have survived again," he said quietly. "But this is not the end. The war will continue. We must heal, reinforce, and prepare for the next engagement." The Ronin moved through the shrine, tending to wounds, reinforcing defenses, and preparing for the coming night. Jinsuk cleaned his blade, reflecting on the battles they had endured and the courage required to continue. He understood now that survival demanded more than skill. It demanded patience, strategy, and unity. Sojin observed quietly, his expression unreadable. "You have survived this engagement," he said softly. "But remember, true survival is as much of the mind as of the body. Respect the forest, respect the land, and respect your own limits. It will reward you if you do, and punish you if you do not." Hiratada nodded. "We understand. Tomorrow we take the initiative again. We fight not only to survive, but to shape the battlefield to our advantage. We are masterless, yes, but not powerless." The wind stirred through the trees, carrying the faint scent of smoke and the distant echo of retreating troops. The shrine stood fragile but unbroken, a testament to the resilience and skill of those who refused to surrender. The Ronin settled into positions for the night, alert even in rest, every sense attuned to the whispers of the forest. Jinsuk stared into the dying fire, contemplating the cost of survival and the courage required to continue. He understood that being a masterless samurai demanded more than strength. It demanded unity, calculation, and endurance. Hiratada walked to the edge of the clearing one last time, eyes scanning the mist-laden forest. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the promise of the next battle. Though battered and outnumbered, the Ronin were ready. Together, they would carve their path through the chaos, proving that even without a master, they were still warriors. Part 12. The forest lay cloaked in a heavy, gray mist as dawn broke, soft light struggling to pierce through the thick canopy. Hiratada moved quietly along the ridge, surveying the terrain with the practiced eye of a warrior who had learned to see every branch, every fallen log, every natural choke point as a potential advantage. The river valley below, narrow and treacherous, promised a battlefield where the Ronin could control the enemy's movements, even against overwhelming numbers. Jinsuk followed closely, short sword in hand, muscles tense. "They'll be here soon," he said, voice low, almost reverent in the stillness of the morning. "I can feel it." Hiratada's eyes never left the distant tree line. "Yes, Matsui will not accept failure. They will come with reinforcements. Today, we decide if strategy and skill can outweigh their numbers. Remember, the forest is as much our weapon as our blades." Inside the shrine, the other Ronin moved with quiet determination. Kid checked her bow, knocking arrows with steady hands. Ichiro tested the traps once more, prodding stakes and inspecting the pitfall covers to ensure they would hold against charging soldiers. Even Sojin moved among them, offering guidance and reassurance, his years of experience a quiet anchor for the younger warriors. The first scouts appeared through the mist, moving cautiously. One step too close to a concealed pit and vanished with a muffled scream. Panic rippled through the others as Hiratada signaled for the attack. Arrows rained from hidden positions, striking the nearest soldiers. Chaos erupted, the forest suddenly alive with the sounds of battle, shouts, steel striking steel, cries of pain, and the low thrum of fear. Hiratada moved like water through the fray, his blade precise, each strike calculated to incapacitate swiftly. Jinsuk fought beside him, fear giving way to instinct, parrying, striking, and learning the rhythm of battle. Ichiro's spear created an impenetrable line at the center, holding the enemy in check. Kid's traps and sharpshooting slowed the enemy's advance, guiding them into positions where the Ronin had the advantage. Despite their small numbers, the Ronin controlled the fight. The forest dictated movement, turning natural obstacles into lethal tools. Pitfalls claimed many, hidden stakes wounded others, and arrows rained from concealed positions. Every attack by the enemy was met with resistance and precision. Hours passed in a blur of motion, sweat, and blood. The forest grew quiet once more, broken only by the retreating footsteps of the surviving Matsui soldiers. The clearing was littered with bodies, both enemy and fallen traps victims, and the air was heavy with the scent of iron and smoke. Hiratada's men were exhausted, yet the victory, though temporary, strengthened their resolve. "We survived," Hiratada said quietly, sheathing his blade. "But the enemy will return. Matsui will not forget this humiliation. We must heal, reinforce, and prepare for the next encounter." The Ronin moved through the shrine, tending to wounds, reinforcing barricades, and redistributing supplies. Jinsuk helped Ichiro stabilize a gash along his leg, his hand surprisingly steady. "I never thought I could do it," Jinsuk admitted softly. "But we survived. We fought and we survived." Hiratada placed a firm hand on the boy's shoulder. "Courage is not the absence of fear," he said. "It is the act of moving forward despite it. Let this victory guide you, but do not let it blind you. Tomorrow, the forest will demand the same courage, and more." The day moved slowly. Every sound in the forest, rustling leaves, snapping twigs, distant birdsong, was treated as intelligence. Hiratada reviewed the map once more, marking choke points, vantage positions, and potential ambush sites. Every tree, every fallen branch, every natural rise in the ground became part of the strategy, a weapon to be wielded against the enemy's numbers. As evening approached, distant drums and horns signaled the approach of another, larger Matsui force. Hiratada's men moved silently to their positions, alert and ready. Kiid's arrows struck from concealment, felling officers and disrupting formation. Ichiro held the center, a living barrier that funneled the attackers into traps. Hiratada and Jinsuk struck from the eastern path, cutting down anyone attempting to break through. The battle raged into the night. Despite being outnumbered, the Ronin controlled the battlefield, their strategy and preparation allowing them to repel wave after wave of attackers. Pitfalls and stakes claimed many. Arrows struck with deadly accuracy, and the forest itself shaped the enemy's movements. Confusion and fear spread through Matsui ranks, their numerical advantage undermined by the terrain and the deadly precision of the defenders. By midnight, the enemy had retreated once more, leaving the forest littered with corpses and debris. The Ronin were exhausted, some wounded, yet alive. Hiratada surveyed them, a mixture of pride and grim awareness in his eyes. "We have survived again," he said quietly. "But the war is far from over. Matsui will return, and we must be ready. Rest while you can, for tomorrow will demand more than courage. It will demand endurance, cunning, and the strength of unity." The Ronin reinforced the shrine, tending to wounds and preparing for the night watch. Jinsuk cleaned his blade by the fire, reflecting on the battles they had endured and the courage required to continue. He understood now that the life of a masterless samurai demanded more than skill. It demanded foresight, patience, and the ability to act decisively when a moment called for it. Sojin watched silently, his expression unreadable. "You have survived this day," he said softly. "But remember, survival is as much of the mind as it is of the body. Respect the forest, respect the land, and respect your own limits. It will reward you if you do, and punish you if you do not." Hiratada nodded. "We understand. Tomorrow, we take the initiative again. We fight not only to survive, but to shape the battlefield to our advantage. We are masterless, yes, but not powerless." The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the faint scent of smoke and the echo of distant retreating soldiers. The shrine stood fragile but unbroken, a testament to those who refused to surrender. The Ronin settled into positions of the night, alert even in rest, every sense attuned to the forest's subtle warnings. Jinsuk stared into the dying fire, contemplating the cost of survival and the courage required to continue. He understood that the life of a masterless samurai demanded unity, calculation, and endurance above all else. Hiratada walked to the edge of the clearing one last time, eyes scanning the forest shrouded in mist. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the promise of the next battle. Though battered and outnumbered, the Ronin were ready. Together, they would carve their path through chaos, proving that even without a master, they were still warriors. Part 13. The forest was alive with the sound of movement before the sun even rose, the mist thick and heavy over the ground, curling around tree trunks like smoke. Hiratada stood atop a small rise, eyes scanning the dense undergrowth and narrow paths that led to the river valley. Matsui's forces were approaching again, larger this time, their banners visible through the haze, soldiers marching with a confidence born of numbers. The Ronin were outnumbered, but today, the terrain would be their weapon and surprise their ally. Jinsuk approached quietly, sword in hand, muscles tense. "They're more than last time," he said, voice low. "I can hear them moving through the trees. More drums, more shouting." Hiratada did not flinch. "Yes, but numbers alone do not win battles," he said. "We have the forest, the traps, and the advantage of strategy. Today, we will choose the battlefield, and we will shape it. Patience and unity will be our edge." Inside the shrine, the Ronin moved with deliberate care. Ki checked her bow, knocking arrows and testing her aim from the concealed position she had claimed. Ichiro inspected traps along the narrow paths, ensuring the stakes were sturdy and the pitfalls secure. Sojin moved quietly among them, offering guidance and reassurance. His age belied the sharpness of his mind, each suggestion precise and invaluable. Hiratada traced the terrain mentally, noting every rise, every slope, every natural bottleneck. "The river valley will funnel their advance," he murmured. "We do not meet them in open ground. We force them into a narrow corridor where our traps and weapons have the advantage. Every tree, every fallen log, every slope is part of the battle now." The first scouts entered the clearing cautiously, unaware of the traps and ambushes waiting for them. One stepped too close to the pitfall and disappeared with a muffled scream. Panic spread through the remaining scouts. Hiratada signaled the Ronin into action. Arrows rained from hidden positions, felling soldiers before they could reach the clearing. Chaos erupted, screams mixing with the sounds of steel striking steel and the low murmur of fear among the enemy. Hiratada moved like water through the fray, every strike precise and calculated. Jinsuk fought beside him, parrying and striking with growing confidence, his fear replaced by instinct and focus. Ichiro held the center with a spear, an immovable wall that funneled the enemy into the kill zone. Ki's traps and arrows ensured that every advance was met with resistance, turning the forest into a deadly labyrinth. Despite being heavily outnumbered, the Ronin controlled the battlefield. Each movement was purposeful, each strike intentional. Pitfalls claimed several soldiers, stakes wounded more, and arrows flew from concealed positions with deadly precision. The terrain dictated the flow of the fight, forcing the enemy into positions where their numbers became a liability. Hours passed, the forest filled with the sounds of battle, sweat, and blood. By midday, the initial wave was repelled, and the surviving Matsui soldiers began to regroup, their morale shaken by the effectiveness of the Masterless samurai. Hiratada surveyed his men, noting fatigue in their movements but determination burning in their eyes. "We have survived this wave," he said quietly, "but the enemy will return stronger. We must prepare for their next assault." The Ronin worked swiftly, reinforcing barricades, repairing traps, and tending to wounds. Jinsuk helped Ichiro stabilize a deep gash along his leg, hands steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through him. "I didn't think I could do it," Jinsuk admitted softly. "But we fought and we survived." Hiratada placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Courage is not the absence of fear," he said. "It is action despite it. Remember this feeling. It will guide you through the battles ahead." The afternoon wore on. Every sound in the forest, rustling leaves, snapping twigs, distant bird calls, was observed with caution. Hiratada reviewed the map, marking choke points, vantage positions, and potential ambush sites. Every tree, every slope, every natural rise became a weapon to be wielded strategically. By late afternoon, distant drums and horns announced the arrival of another, even larger Matsui contingent. Hiratada's men moved to their positions with precision. Ki's arrows struck from concealment, felling officers and creating chaos within enemy ranks. Ichiro held the center, guiding the attackers into the traps. Hiratada and Jinsuk struck from the eastern path, cutting down anyone attempting to break through. The battle raged through the evening. Despite overwhelming numbers, the Ronin strategy allowed them to repel wave after wave of attackers. Pitfalls claimed many, stakes pierced limbs, and arrows struck with deadly accuracy. The enemy faltered repeatedly, their formations collapsing under the weight of confusion and the terrain. By nightfall, Matsui's forces were in retreat, leaving the clearing strewn with bodies and the scent of blood and smoke. The Ronin, exhausted and wounded, gathered in the shrine, tending to each other, reinforcing defenses, and preparing for the inevitable next assault. Hirotada surveyed them, pride mingled with grim awareness. "We survived today," he said quietly, "but the war is far from over. We must heal, reinforce, and prepare for tomorrow. Courage alone will not suffice. It will require cunning, endurance, and unity." Jinsuk cleaned his sword by the fire, reflecting on the day's battles. The life of a masterless samurai demanded more than skill. It demanded foresight, patience, and decisive action under pressure. He understood now that survival was not just about defeating an enemy, but about controlling the battlefield and anticipating every move. Sojin observed quietly, voice low, "You have survived again, but remember, true mastery is as much of the mind as it is of the body. Respect the forest, respect the land, and respect your limits. It will reward you if you do, and punish you if you do not." Hirotada nodded. "We understand. Tomorrow, we continue to take the initiative. We fight not only to survive, but to shape the battlefield to our advantage. We are masterless, yes, but not powerless." The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the faint scent of smoke and the distant sound of retreating troops. The shrine stood fragile but unbroken, a fortress for those who refused to surrender. The Ronin settled into their night positions, alert even in rest, every sense tuned to the forest's subtle warnings. Jinsuk stared into the fire, contemplating the cost of survival and the courage it demanded. Being a masterless samurai was no longer just about strength. It required unity, calculation, and endurance. Hirotada walked to the edge of the clearing one last time, eyes scanning the forest shrouded in mist. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the promise of the next battle. Though battered and outnumbered, the Ronin were ready. Together, they would carve their path through the chaos, proving that even without a master, they were still warriors. Part 14. The forest lay heavy with morning fog, every tree and fallen branch cloaked in gray silence. Hirotada moved along the ridge overlooking the river valley, eyes sharp and mind alert. He sensed movement long before it became visible. The distant thrum of boots on earth, the faint rhythm of drums, the whisper of soldiers preparing for assault. Matsui's forces had grown more numerous, their banners now a dark blot against the mist, and the weight of their presence pressed like a storm on the fragile clearing around Sarayu's shrine. Jinsuk approached quietly, short sword in hand, muscles coiled and ready. "They're more than ever," he said, voice low but steady. "I can hear their formations moving through the trees. More shouting, more horns." Hirotada did not flinch. "Numbers do not win battles," he said calmly. "We have the terrain, the traps, and the advantage of strategy. Today, we define the battlefield, and the forest will do our bidding. Patience, precision, and unity are our edge." Inside the shrine, the Ronin prepared quietly. Keed checked her bow and arrows, testing tension and aim from her concealed northern position. Ichiro inspected the traps along the narrow eastern path, ensuring stakes were firm and pitfalls secure. Sojin moved silently among them, offering counsel where needed, the sharpness of his mind tempered by decades of experience. Hirotada traced the battlefield in his mind, noting every slope, every rise, every choke point. "The river valley will funnel them," he murmured. "We do not fight on open ground. We force them where their numbers count for nothing. Every tree, every fallen branch, every slope is part of the plan." The first scouts emerged from the mist, moving cautiously. One misstepped over a concealed pit and vanished with a muffled scream. Panic spread among the others, and Hirotada signaled the Ronin into action. Arrows flew from hidden positions, striking soldiers before they could react. Chaos erupted, steel clashing against steel, cries of pain, and the thrum of fear spreading through the enemy lines. Hirotada moved like water through the fray, every strike precise, each motion deliberate. Jinsuk fought beside him, fear giving way to instinct, parrying and striking with growing confidence. Ichiro held the center, his spear creating a wall that funneled the enemy into the traps. Keed's sharpshooting and hidden mechanisms slowed the enemy, turning the forest into a deadly labyrinth. Despite being heavily outnumbered, the Ronin controlled the battlefield. Each strike had purpose, Each movement was calculated. Pitfalls claimed soldiers, stakes impaled others, and arrows flew with deadly accuracy. The terrain dictated the enemy's flow, transforming their advantage into a liability. Hours passed, the battle moving in a blur of motion and blood. By midday, the first wave was repelled, and the survivors of Matsui's force attempted to regroup. Their morale was shaken. The Masterless samurai had proven a formidable opponent. Hirotada surveyed his men, noting fatigue but also resolve. "We survived this engagement," he said quietly. "But the enemy will return, stronger and more determined. We must heal, reinforce, and prepare for the next assault." The Ronin moved swiftly, tending to wounds, reinforcing barricades, and repairing traps. Jinsuk helped Ichiro stabilize a gash along his arm, hands steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through him. "I didn't think I could survive," Jinsuk admitted softly. "But we fought and we survived." Hirotada placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Courage is not the absence of fear," he said. "It is action despite it. Let this victory guide you, but do not let it breed complacency. Tomorrow, the forest will demand the same courage, and more." The afternoon stretched long. Every rustle of leaves, snap of a twig, or distant bird call was scrutinized. Hirotada reviewed his mental map of the valley, marking choke points, ambush sites, and high ground. Every natural feature became a weapon, every tree and slope a tool in their strategy. As evening fell, distant drums and horns heralded another wave of Matsui reinforcements, larger than before. Hirotada's men assumed positions with precision. Keed's arrows struck from concealment, picking off officers and creating chaos in enemy ranks. Ichiro held the center, guiding attackers into traps, while Hirotada and Jinsuk struck decisively from the eastern path. The battle raged through the twilight hours. Despite being outnumbered, the Ronin's planning and cohesion allowed them to repel wave after wave of attackers. Pitfalls claimed many. Stakes pierced limbs, and arrows struck with lethal accuracy. Confusion spread through enemy ranks, their formations collapsing under the weight of the forest's deadly guidance. By nightfall, the enemy retreated once more, leaving the forest littered with bodies and the scent of blood and smoke. The Ronin, exhausted and wounded, gathered in the shrine, tending to one another, reinforcing defenses, and preparing for the inevitable return. Hirotada surveyed them, pride mingled with grim awareness. "We survived today," he said quietly, "but the war is far from over. We must rest, heal, and prepare. Courage alone will not suffice. It will demand endurance, cunning, and unity." Jinsuk cleaned his blade by the fire, reflecting on the day's brutal battles. He understood that survival was more than strength. It required patience, calculation, and the ability to anticipate every move. Sojin spoke quietly. "You have survived this engagement, but remember, true mastery is of the mind as much as the body. Respect the forest, respect the land, and respect your limits. It will reward you if you do, and punish you if you do not." Hirotada nodded. "We understand. Tomorrow, we will continue to shape the battlefield. We fight not only to survive, but to control the fight. Masterless, yes, but not powerless." The wind stirred through the trees, carrying the faint scent of smoke and the distant sound of retreating troops. The shrine stood fragile but unbroken, a testament to those who refused to surrender. The Ronin settled into night positions, alert even in rest, every sense attuned to the forest's subtle warnings. Jinsuk stared into the dying fire, contemplating the cost of survival and the courage it demanded. Being a masterless samurai required more than strength. It demanded unity, calculation, and endurance. Hirotada walked the edge of the clearing one last time, eyes scanning the mist-laden forest. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the promise of the next battle. Though battered and outnumbered, the Ronin were ready. Together, they would carve their path through the chaos, proving that even without a master, they were still warriors. Part 15. The dawn broke quietly over the forest, the mist thinner now, sunlight filtering through the canopy in pale, shifting shafts. Hirotada stood at the edge of the clearing, his eyes tracing every contour of the land, every rise and depression that could become a battlefield. Today, the final confrontation was inevitable. Matsui's forces had returned in full, their banners flapping in the morning breeze, the sound of marching boots echoing through the valley. The weight of their numbers pressed down on the small group of Ronin, but the resolve in Hiratada's chest was steady and unyielding. Jinsuk approached, sword in hand, his movements fluid now, confidence hardened by months of relentless struggle. "This is it," he said softly, voice low. "We've survived everything else. We can do this." Hiratada placed a firm hand on the boy's shoulder. "Courage brought us this far, but strategy will see us through. Today, we fight not merely to survive, but to prove that even without a master, we are still warriors." Inside the shrine, the Ronin readied themselves. Keed knocked her arrows, eyes scanning the trees for movement. Ichiro adjusted the spear wall, reinforcing weak points and checking the stakes. Sojin moved quietly among them, distributing bandages and offering words of guidance, the weight of his wisdom anchoring the younger men. Every motion was deliberate, every preparation precise. Hiratada moved through the clearing, memorizing the positions of natural obstacles, trap lines, and choke points. "The river valley will be our advantage," he murmured. "We do not engage them in open ground. We will force them into positions where their numbers count for nothing." The first wave of Matsui soldiers emerged through the trees, scouts at the forefront, testing the perimeter. One misstepped over a hidden pit and vanished with a muffled scream. Panic spread, and Hiratada signaled the Ronin into action. Arrows rained down from concealed positions, felling officers and creating chaos among the ranks. The clash of steel echoed through the forest, punctuated by cries of pain and shouts of command. Hiratada moved fluidly, every strike precise and efficient. Jinsuk fought beside him, fear replaced by instinct, parrying and striking with growing confidence. Ichiro's spear wall held the center, a living barricade guiding the enemy into traps. Keed's arrows and concealed mechanisms ensured that every advance was met with resistance, turning the forest into a deadly maze. Despite being heavily outnumbered, the Ronin controlled the battlefield. Every strike had purpose, every movement calculated. Pitfalls claimed soldiers, stakes pierced limbs, and arrows struck with deadly accuracy. The terrain dictated the enemy's movement, transforming their numerical advantage into vulnerability. Hours passed, the battle a relentless blur of motion, strategy, and blood. By midday, the first wave had been repelled, and the remaining Matsui forces hesitated, regrouping under confusion of repeated losses. Hiratada surveyed his men, noting their fatigue but also the resolve that burned in their eyes. "We have survived this wave," he said quietly, "but the enemy will not relent. Today, we will fight with every ounce of skill, courage, and cunning we possess." The Ronin moved with quiet efficiency, reinforcing barricades, tending to wounds, and preparing traps for the next engagement. Jinsuk helped Ichiro bind a deep gash along his shoulder, hands steady despite exhaustion. "I never thought I'd make it this far," Jinsuk admitted softly. "But here we are." Hiratada placed a hand on his shoulder. "Courage is not the absence of fear," he said. "It is action despite it. Let this day be a testament to what we can achieve when we act with precision and unity." The afternoon grew long. Every sound, rustling leaves, snapping twigs, distant calls, was scrutinized for signs of movement. Hiratada reviewed the terrain in his mind, planning ambush points, choke zones, and positions of advantage. Every natural feature, the river, fallen logs, slopes, and dense thickets, became a tool of strategy. As evening approached, the final wave of Matsui's soldiers advanced, larger than before, confident and determined. Hiratada's men took their positions with absolute precision. Keed's arrows struck from concealment, felling officers and scattering enemy formations. Ichiro held the center, guiding soldiers into traps and pitfalls. Hiratada and Jinsuk moved along the eastern path, cutting down anyone attempting to break through. The battle raged into twilight hours, a brutal symphony of strategy, endurance, and sacrifice. Despite overwhelming numbers, the Ronin's cohesion allowed them to repel wave after wave. Pitfalls claimed many. Stakes pierced the legs and torsos of attackers, and arrows flew with lethal precision. The forest dictated the fight, guiding enemies into the traps, forcing confusion and collapse. By nightfall, Matsui's forces had been routed. The clearing was littered with bodies, the scent of blood and smoke heavy in the air. The Ronin, battered and exhausted, gathered in the shrine, tending to one another, reinforcing barricades, and catching what rest they could. Hirotada surveyed them, pride mingled with grief for the lives lost. "We have survived," he said quietly. "But this is more than survival. We have proven that even without a master, we can stand against overwhelming odds. Today, we fought with courage, with strategy, and with unity. Remember this. Your strength lies not only in your blade, but in your mind and your will." Jinsook cleaned his sword by the fire, reflecting on the battles endured and the courage required. He understood now that being a masterless samurai demanded more than skill. It required foresight, patience, and decisive action under pressure. Sojin spoke softly. "You have endured and prevailed. But remember, true mastery is as much of the mind as of the body. Respect the land, respect each other, and respect your limits. It will reward you if you do, and punish you if you do not." Hirotada nodded, looking to his men. "We fought not only to survive, but to shape our destiny. We are masterless, yes, but we are not powerless. Let this battle be remembered as proof of our resolve, courage, and sacrifice." The wind stirred through the trees, carrying the faint scent of smoke and the distant echo of retreating soldiers. The shrine stood fragile but unbroken, a testament to those who refused to surrender. The Ronin settled into positions for the night, alert even in rest, every sense attuned to forest's subtle warnings. Jinsook stared into the dying fire, contemplating the cost of their survival and the courage it demanded. The life of a masterless samurai required unity, calculation, and endurance above all else. Hirotada walked to the edge of the clearing one last time, eyes scanning the forest. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the promise of new battles, new challenges. Though battered and outnumbered, the Ronin had endured. Together, they had carved their path through chaos, proving that even without a master, they were still warriors. Their legacy was not in numbers, not in allegiance, but in courage, sacrifice, and the unyielding would stand against impossible odds. And in that quiet, misty forest, the masterless samurai stood tall, a reminder that honor and resilience could survive even in the harshest of wars.